With Radio Algeria International, you will not miss a single major political or economic event. Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
The President of the Republic, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces and Minister of National Defense Abdelmajid Tebboune today chaired a cabinet meeting devoted to the examining of draft laws and projects related to various economic sectors. The UN has announced that 248 lorries of humanitarian aid have arrived in the Gaza Strip since the truce came into force 2 days ago. And a third group of Palestinian detainees in Israeli jails are due to be released today on the third day of the truce enforced in the Gaza Strip. And the representative of the Palestinian Hamas movement to Algeria, Youssef Hamid, warned that if the Zionist enemy violates the truce, the resistant fighters will make it pay a high price. Those were the headlines, and now the news in detail from Radio Algeria International. First, the President of the Republic, Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces and Defense Minister Abdelmajid Tebboune today presided over a meeting of the Council of Ministers devoted to the examining of draft laws and projects related to various economic sectors. A draft law related to the mining activities was examined during the meeting that also focused on reports related to the opening of the capital of 2 public banks, as well as to the conditions and the granting modalities of the industrial real estate destined to the achievement of investment projects. The compensations to be made to fishermen who were also examined by the meeting. The President of the Republic, Mr. Abdelmajid Tebboune, has sent a message of condolences to the family of former Minister of Commerce Al-Ayashi Yaqar, praising the qualities of the deceased who had accomplished his missions with dedication and merit. President Tebboune wrote in his message that he had learned of the disappearance of Al-Ayashi Yaqar with deep sorrow, adding that he was a man among the executives of the state who assumed with dedication and merit high functions and responsibilities as ambassador, parliamentarian, and minister. The head of state extended in these painful circumstances his sincerest and deepest feelings of compassion, praying to Allah Almighty to cover the deceased with his vast merit or mercy, and to lend his family patience and forbearance. The Algerian Red Crescent has announced the granting of humanitarian aid to Palestinian students residing in Algeria as part of the agreement concluded with the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research. The president of the Algerian Red Crescent, Ibtissam Hamlawi, reaffirmed the solidarity of Algeria in all circumstances along Palestinian students, underlining the humanitarian role of her institution in the support of Palestinian students in the difficult situation that Gaza is experiencing following the Zionist aggression against the defenseless population there. Ms. Hamlawi said that the Algerian Red Crescent managed, in collaboration with the various partners, to collect a significant quantity of basic products such as medicines, pharmaceuticals, foodstuffs, blankets, and tents with a view to sending them to the population in Gaza. For his part, the project manager at the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research, Youssef Houri, emphasized the importance of this humanitarian gesture, stressing the imperative to help Palestinian students residing in Algeria in these difficult circumstances. He recalled that the Minister of Higher Education had given instructions to support Palestinian students and provide them with the necessary assistance. The representative of Palestinian students in Algeria, Mohammed bin Samak, expressed his thanks to the Algerian authorities, the Algerian Red Crescent, and all partners which contributed to the provision of humanitarian aid to the Palestinian people, welcoming Algeria's unwavering positions in support of the just Palestinian cause. A second group of 39 Palestinian prisoners, including 6 women and 33 children, have been released from the 2 Israeli prisons in Beitunia, west of Ramallah, and in occupied Jerusalem, respectively. The press news agency Wafa stressed that several journalists who were covering the event were attacked by the Israeli authorities west of Ramallah. Israeli occupying authorities had introduced changes to the list of Palestinian prisoners to be released, a move that caused the Palestinian Hamas movement to react.
When Al-Qassam brigades issued their statement whereby they said that they would suspend the soldiers' handover, they send a clear message not only to the Zionist occupier but also to the mediators whom we informed about all these abuses, and we held them responsible for the abuses of the Zionist enemy. The Zionist enemy's behavior shows that it doesn't want to complete this humanitarian truce and all the relevant obligations imposed on both sides, and doesn't look forward to other truces of this kind as wished by the US. We are in an open war with the Zionist enemy, and our fingers are on the trigger, and our goal is Al-Quds. So the agreement, so will we. But if it violates it, then we will annul it, and our fighters are still positioned in the battlefield, and the fingers are on the trigger, and the enemy will pay the price of the massacres it is committing and its violation of the agreement.
That was the representative of the Palestinian Hamas movement in Algeria, Youssef Hamid, who denounced the abuses made by the Zionist occupier and warned that if Israel violates the truce, the resistance fighters positioned in the battlefield will make it pay a high price. Now, a third group of Palestinians detained in Israeli jails are due to be released today on the third day of the truce enforced in the Gaza Strip. The truce is said to be generally respected by the Palestinian. Hamas deplored the delay in the release of the two groups of Palestinian prisoners. It accused the Israeli occupying authorities of not abiding by the provision of the truce agreed on as part of an accord reached under Qatar's mediation and backed by the US and Egypt. Meanwhile, lorries laden with humanitarian aid entered to the Palestinian enclave for the first time in 7 weeks of relentless bombardments on Gaza. The UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Aid, which set at least 1.7 the number of displaced in the Gaza Strip, said it feared the humanitarian situation to worsen as the population is facing risks of major propagation of infectious diseases. This came as 8 Palestinians were killed for the past 24 hours by the Israeli forces following an incursion carried out into the West Bank town of Jenin. According to medical sources, 15 other people were wounded in the incident. And the UN has announced that 248 lorries of humanitarian aid have arrived in Gaza Strip. Since the truce came into force, 61 of the vehicles containing medical equipment, food, and water were delivered to the northern part of Gaza. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Aid, OCHA, stressed that the longer the truce would last, the humanitarian organizations would be able to send more aid to the Palestinian population of the Gaza Strip, thanking the Palestinian and the Egyptian Red Crescent, which are supervising the aid delivery. For weeks, the UN and NGOs and several capitals have called for a truce or ceasefire in order to allow for the delivery of emergency aid to the population of Gaza, which is surviving under disastrous humanitarian conditions. And with this last piece of news, we come to the end of this news bulletin. Time now for weekly programs, starting with a program devoted to the situation in Gaza with my colleague Jamal Silmani, with the Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council, Jan Egeland, who said in a statement on the humanitarian pause in Gaza that they will do all what they can to provide relief to those in need in Gaza during the 4-day humanitarian pause. And it will be followed by the international event of the week. And with this, we come to the end of it. We'll meet you again tomorrow for a fresh edition of our news bulletin in English. Until then, stay tuned to Radio Algeria International, and bye-bye for now.
The Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council said a pause of few days is not enough time to address the immense needs after 6 weeks of fighting, bloodshed and destruction, stressing that the humanitarian pause must pave the way for a lasting ceasefire. He added that a sustained ceasefire is needed to prevent further civilian deaths and provide safety for people in need of vital humanitarian assistance. Youssef Hamid is the Norwegian Refugee Council spokesperson in Gaza. For 3 years, he has been working as their advocacy officer in his homeland. In this role, he documents life from within what is known by many as the world's largest open-air prison. The Norwegian Refugee Council has shared with Radio Algeria International the testimony of Youssef Hamesh, who spoke about the situation on the ground on the first day of the truce and the feeling of the survivors of the ethnic cleansing in Gaza. As he said, everyone has a story.
Today is the first day of the truce after that 7 weeks of bombardment, 7 weeks of non-sleeping, 7 weeks of the violence that we never ever imagined in our lives that we would ever see. These 7 weeks were the longest, the heaviest, the hardest, the unimaginable 7 weeks. Today, the first day of the truce, people were everywhere in the streets. It was really traffic. People were encouraged to be in the streets. Thousands of them were in the streets for the first time. Thousands of people who fled to Norway schools or other shelters, especially who live in eastern part of Khan Yunis and eastern part of Rafah, eastern part of the middle area. Most of them go back today to check their houses, if it's still there, if they get any of their needs from there. It was weird feeling in the streets, how people are reacting. If you look to their faces, you cannot understand it. You can see people who are a bit happy, they are alive at least. Other people who have this time as an opportunity to feel sad and sorrow for what they lose, for their loved ones. It's a case by case for everyone here. You cannot understand the general situation because there is no general situation here. It's a case by case. Everyone have his own story, his own way of thinking, his own loss.
Youssef has been documenting life in Gaza since the 7th of October almost daily, despite significant personal challenges and connectivity issues. Due to security reasons, Youssef could not go back home and check what remains of his house or his parents' house following the massive destruction by the Israeli occupation airstrikes. He said it is impossible to meet the needs of the refugees in the 4-day truce.
Thousands of people also were trying to go back north. The Israeli forces have prevented them. The Israeli forces prevented everyone to cross Salah ad-Din Street, while everyone was hoping at least to go to check, because even I personally wanted to know if my house still there, my parents' house still there, if we have anything remaining there. Unfortunately, I couldn't. That's why I say it's really weird feeling from the people here around us. If you look to the people's face, you can see that people still have hope. Maybe they are looking for this as an opportunity for a longer truce to reach a ceasefire. Also, part of the day was NRC to do an assessment, to interfere, to serve and help displaced people, but it's more than impossible, not only for us, even for all the humanitarian actors combined together, to serve more than 1 million people who have been displaced. And even people who haven't been displaced, also they are in need. And it's more than impossible to serve all of these needs, it's more than impossible to cover the needs of all the people in the south in 4 days. I don't think if we combine all the humanitarian actors, either UN or international organization or local together, can manage to serve all people in need. Also, the amount of trucks that coming from Rafah are not enough to cover a small percentage of the need. But we are trying. We will keep trying to do our best to serve people in need, and because this is why we are here. That's what's giving us a reason to stay.
Youssef, the advocacy officer and spokesperson of the Norwegian Refugee Council in Gaza, was displaced from his home in the north to Khan Yunis with his wife and 2 small children. He expressed hope the truce would pave the way for a lasting ceasefire in order to save the lives of the innocent civilian Palestinians who have lost their loved ones, homes, and have nothing left after the Israeli barbaric offensive.
I really wish this truce will extend to a ceasefire, and this is the hope of all Palestinians who are trapped in Gaza under this unimaginable situation. So it might be a hope, and it might lead for something in the horizon. Hopefully we will reach a ceasefire. And I had a really, really weird feeling, but I feel I was in need for that feeling. I moved while I have the feeling of safety while I was driving in Gaza, going from a place to place without the fear of getting bombed. So hopefully it's a beginning for something bigger.
The Norwegian Refugee Council said children in Gaza are traumatized and many face a future without their parents and siblings, stressing that they need urgent, long-term help, which can only happen through a sustained ceasefire.
The international event of the week.
A major event this week was the conclusion of a deal reached between Israel and the Palestinian Hamas movement, providing for a 4-day pause in fighting. The deal, reached under Qatar's mediation, provides for the release of a first group of hostages held in Gaza and 150 Palestinians detained in Israeli jails. Under the agreement, the humanitarian aid allowed in Gaza will be significantly increased at a time when all military action and movements would ease during the 4-day truce. In this respect, 200 lorries carrying aid as well as 4 fuel tanks will be allowed on each of the 4 days to enter Gaza via the crossing point of Rafah on the border with Egypt. Asked on whether the war waged by Israel on Gaza would be longer, as the pause agreed on was the only result secured after long weeks of negotiations, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi had this to say.
The pause could be extended because of the benefits that all parties will gain. And with time, it could lead to a ceasefire. But the question depends on what the United States and Israel have to offer to the Palestinians. The Palestinians are very clear. Short of freeing all prisoners in the Israelis' jails and the end of Israeli occupations, the Palestinian resistance has been firm, indicating it will continue to fight for the human dignity of Palestinians and the freedom of Palestine. The key player in this scenario, which is to achieve a ceasefire, is the United States, which has leverage to stop Israel, as it has demonstrated these few days, pressuring Israel twice to accept the term of the current pause. Trapped under pressure by the American public, which has caused frictions among the Democrats and caused low ratings of the American president for his handling of the war in Gaza, President Joe Biden has little option to maneuver out of this crisis without risking the loss of the presidency, the Senate, and a poor showing in the House of Representatives. Along with that comes the international pressure that the United States is heavily under, much of it demanding the American president to hold Israel accountable, and more so to stop financing the Jewish states. This is all at the risk of losing yet another advantage, its strategic interests in the Middle East and Northern Africa. No doubt the American administration understands these challenges. The challenges it faces in the region of the Middle East, the impact and its impact on public opinion in the U.S. is a big deal. Losing the upcoming elections is another thing to consider. Worldwide, sullying its image for the benefit of its rival Russia and China is a serious threat to America's interest in the Middle East and Northern Africa. Perhaps it is with this in mind that the United States has been looking for solution past this war, but its approach so far appears as a no-starter, not just for the Palestinian resistance, but for the Israelis as well. How far this go depends on how America, that is Joe Biden, is able to navigate between the Palestinians' demand and those, for that matter, of the international community supporting Palestine, that are for a freedom of Palestine, and those of the Israel being bent on continuing the occupation. The U.S. has the power to do the right thing and put an end to this war. It is the only way. The only way out is for peace, because siding for Israel could be devastating for the entire region, not just America. This pause is therefore for all parties to reassess their position, but it should be used for finding ways to achieve a long and lasting peace in the region. That responsibility could be that of the U.S.
This week, the Israeli army extended its operations to the northern part of the Gaza Strip amid continued bombardments that claimed scores of lives. The Indonesian hospital located near the major refugee camp of Jabalia, north of Gaza, was hit by the bombardments at a time when the Israeli army pursued its airstrikes at the southern part of the Palestinian enclave. The Arab Parliament condemned in its strongest words the Israeli strikes this week on 2 schools in Gaza, notably as yet another war crime that must be investigated and that required the accountability of those responsible for it. It called on the international community, the UN Security Council, and human rights to put a genuine pressure on Israel to put an end to escalation and to war machinery in Gaza. How the UN Security Council would deal with the war crimes issue, as its members still hold divergent views on the Palestinian question, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi had the following.
As expected, or would be expected, the United States will block any attempt at bringing war crimes against Israel and hold the Israeli leadership responsible for such crimes. The United States will no doubt veto any resolution at the United Nations Security Council against the Israeli aggression under the false pretext that Israel acted in self-defense and that Israel crimes against humanity were a necessary response to Hamas, which it labels as terrorist actions on October 7. Under pressure from the international community, supporters of Palestine in the United Nations Security Council, and domestic pressure, the United States may seek a compromise with a language that would blame both sides, but with the condition that such a mention would be most likely in the preamble of the resolution and not in the operative clauses, those considered as action items that the world expect the United Nations Security Council to execute. Judging by how the United States has positioned itself in the United Security Council in defense of Israel so far, an example will suffice here to illustrate that it is moving in the direction outlined above. The headline of a meeting held by the United Nations Security Council to discuss the humanitarian issues in Gaza back on October 30th of this year reads as taking sides with the U.S., stating that civilians in Gaza must not be collectively punished for atrocities committed by Hamas. A speaker tells a Security Council, end of quote, of the headline. The headline ignored most views that had questioned Israel for the collective punishment it imposed on Gaza and the atrocities it has committed against the Palestinians, including Gaza, for many decades now. The headlines blames only Hamas, to reiterate. Call it coincidence, but the United States representative at that meeting justified Israel's actions as having the right to defend itself from terrorism and that Hamas must not use Palestinians as human shields. Such statement could be seen as setting the tone for how the United States has and would approach any resolution that would seek to condemn Israel for its crime against humanity in Gaza. So from that perspective, the United Nations Security Council role will be limited and will be also irrelevant in a lot of cases.
This week, Palestinian president called on U.S. President Joe Biden to intervene immediately to put an end to the attacks by the Israeli occupying forces and to the Jewish settlers' terror against the Palestinian people in the West Bank and in occupied Jerusalem that could lead to an imminent explosion. This came as U.S. President Joe Biden reiterated that the two-state solution remained the only means of ensuring security in the long run for the Israeli and Palestinian peoples. He advocated a future reunification of the West Bank and the Gaza Strip under a revitalized Palestinian Authority. Asked if President Biden has the means and capacity to carry through such an initiative, our political analyst Hamoud Salhi commented the issue.
No doubt, such a decision is out of President Joe Biden's jurisdiction or those of the United States. event in Gaza demonstrate that the Palestinians have the means and capacity to trace their own destiny. Conversely, the United States has limited means, only limited to the use of force, which translates into continued occupation, that is, Israeli occupation. Its capacity to exercise its influence over the Palestinians is also limited because it lost credibility to be an honest broker of peace for many decades now, siding unconditionally with Israel, and especially at this time when the Palestinians need relief as they are daily massacred by Israeli action. But here is another view, a positive perhaps. It should be noted that President Biden's statement must be or could be taken in a broader sense. It can be viewed as a step in finding a political settlement to the Israeli actions and putting to bed, hopefully, their blame on the Palestinian resistance. It sets the tone and an opportunity for the Palestinian, or it could set the tone and opportunity for the Palestinians to bring at the front line their demand for self-determination, independence, and self-rule under what President Biden is talking about, the future of Gaza. Through their representative, the Palestinian resistance have also indirectly responded to Biden's statement, reminding this week that the world that they would not accept any foreign intervention to Gaza. If President Biden is serious, he could take that statement as a red line and begin by ending this war of occupation and providing a space for the Palestinians to define their destiny by themselves and for themselves. Ending the occupation is the right way for President Biden to take, looking for a political settlement to bring a Palestinian state independent and free is a way to bring peace to the region.
According to the UN, over two-thirds of the 2.4 million inhabitants have been displaced by the war. The 6-week-long war in Gaza has so far claimed over 14,500 lives, mainly civilians.
مقالات برنامج السلطة الخامسة لهذا الاثنين من موقع الخليج أونلاين. نقرأ: ما السيناريوهات المتوقعة بعد هدنة الأيام